Welcome back to Late Night Review. In today's video, we will be reviewing Trial Day 30 with Dr. Frank Sheridan, Daniel Wolf, and Dr. Andrew Rentschler. He is a doctor in forensic pathology, and he is retired now, but he is actually, first time I've heard this, he's triple board certified in atomic pathology, neuropathy, and forensic pathology. In the course of his career, he's done 13,000 autopsies. He said he looked at the pictures of John's autopsy and believes that the injuries on his arm are friction injuries and were sustained prior to death. He explained how an abrasion or a laceration, he could tell the difference between the color between prior to death and post-mortem. And based off of that knowledge, he can tell that John's injuries on his arm happened before he died. He also further states that the injuries on his arm were not the result of being hit by a vehicle. He believes this because there's no bruising or fractures on his arm. He said his initial view of the photo, he said it was consistent with an animal attack. And then once he did do all his research, he didn't stray from that initial opinion. He was also asked if the injuries on John's arm look like injuries that would take place from an SUV hitting an arm at 24 miles per hour. And he said no, because those cuts are patterned. He said that the absence of the injuries to his legs are a problem if they're trying to say he got hit by a vehicle, which is identical testimony to Dr. Irene Scortibello. She had the same comment. There was no injuries to the bottom of his body. I know Lowley tries to point out this bruise on his knee as evidence of the hit, but neither of these two individuals have given that bruise any significance. He did agree that the injuries could be the result from an altercation. When it was Lowley's turn to cross, he really just didn't have anything to ask Dr. Sheridan. He usually insists during these times when he doesn't have anything to rebuttal, he'll use that time as an opportunity to remind the jury of the DNA evidence that was on the tail light as well as the bumper and on the pieces of clothing of John's, as well as that the SUV had an all-around camera view. Lowley asked him if any of the cuts or other injuries on any part of John's body look like injuries that result from being... What the hell was that? Look like a result from being... I'm going to leave this in here and not cut that out. Do you see how those balloons just went by? This is going to be... It kind of sounds strange, but throughout filming this case, throughout filming my reviews, I have gotten strange stuff like that happening to me. I am not sure if I'm going to create a video to show you all the orbs that flew by me at certain times when I would say things, but stuff like that happened. I always try to pay attention what I was saying or what somebody was saying when I see these orbs or those weird things happening like this. So I need to cut this to see where I was at. As I was saying, he was asked if any of the cuts or scratches or injuries to John's body, if any of those look like the result of being hit by a vehicle, and he said no, none. Literally said no, none. Next on the stand is Daniel Wolf, and he is one of the individuals that was part of the voir dire from trial day 27. If you'd like to know more information about Daniel Wolf, go check out that summary review of mine, and you'll get a better understanding of Mr. Wolf's credentials. So he was not hired by either the defense nor the prosecution. He was hired by a separate entity to recreate this scene and try to figure out what happened. Both defense and prosecution had access to this individual. Apparently, the Commonwealth did not use him, but here we have him being used by defense, and he is also not receiving any money for his testimony. They did methodical tests to reconstruct the scene and breaking the glass on the tail light. And they did create a air cannon to try to recreate this damage. And it could only be it could only be done at 37 miles per hour. He said after all of his testing, he would conclude that the damage to the taillight would not have been caused by a human's arm or a head because of the amount of force that was needed. During Lowley's cross-examination, he asked Mr. Wolf if he looked at Karen's vehicle that actually was still in police custody, and he said no, he didn't. And he said, did he know that the police still had custody of this vehicle and he could have looked at it? And he said, no, he didn't know that. And he further said that there was no need for him to look at her vehicle because he had enough pictures to reconstruct what he needed to reconstruct. Lowley continued to ask him questions about the weather, the lighting, and the type of glass he used for his test, and even asked him if he went to the waterfall bar and got one of their glasses, and he said no, we didn't do that. And so with that, I'm going to tell you something about Lowley. When he doesn't get the answer he's looking for from an individual, even after he's repeatedly asked the same question or kind of changed it in a way to try to get the answer he wants, he will result in bringing up the alleged facts from the case. So for example, he asked, did you read the police report? And Mr. Wolf says, no, I didn't. Lowley will say, so you didn't know that John and Karen got into a fight with each other after leaving the waterfall bar? Mr. Jackson objects. Judge Beverly sustains. And then he'll continue with his next question. And he'll say, were you aware that John's DNA was found on the bumper of Karen's SUV? Then Jackson objects and Judge Beverly sustained. So he uses it as an opportunity to remind the jury, like, hey, remember this fact. Just because this information isn't there based off of this expert witness's testimony, don't forget these other facts. And though he's asking these questions, they're not relevant to this individual, and that's why they're getting objections. And Judge Beverly is sustaining these objections. So with that, that was the end of Mr. Wolf's testimony. Next on the stand is Dr. Andrew Rentschler. And he also works for the same company as Daniel Wolf. Dr. Rentschler is a biomechanical engineer and accident reconstructionist, and he figures out how injuries actually occur from an accident on the human body. So for instance, with John, he has these injuries all over his arm. So he looks at that and then tries to figure out, okay, how would those injuries have been made? What kind of force would need to be applied to the skin, to the body to create this? If it's a vehicle, in this case, it's a vehicle. If it's a vehicle, how much pressure, what kind of other injury should I see on the body based off of particularly a vehicle hitting this person? And again, same thing with him. He was not hired by the defense or prosecution to give this testimony. He was hired from an outside agency to reconstruct this scene. Again, just like Daniel Wolf, both sides had access to his information. And if you want more information on his credentials, check out my summary for trial day 27. Mr. Jackson asked him what conclusions he came to. He said that he came to his conclusions based off all the evidence he was giving, such as like the police report, the pictures of the vehicle, the pictures of the broken taillight, the autopsy report of John, stuff like that. He said at 24 miles per hour, when a body is hit, it will have fractures or broken bones. And as we know, John's arm did not have any fractures or broken bones. He did have the fracture on the back of the head, but as we are focusing on Trooper Paul's reconstruction saying that John was hit on his arm by the vehicle, we are looking at the damage done to the arm. He said the injuries to John's head was not the result of being struck by a taillight. So he was explaining like, okay, let's just say John's head was by the vehicle and got hit by the vehicle. He said that would not have been the result of that injury either. Mr. Jackson asked him, okay, well, if a person was hit, if John was hit on the arm and it spun him around, could that result in the head injury? And he explained that the head and the arm actually weighed the same. And so the injuries to the arm or to the head would be the same. You would have broken bones or fractures. and this was not present in John's body. Mr. Jackson asked him, well, like, could he have been hit and then projected back and hit the concrete? And he said, well, yeah, he could have fallen and hit the concrete. He could have slipped and fell and hit the concrete. There could be an infinite amount of ways he could have injured the back of his head. But to conclusively say, for him to have been hit on his arm and then, thus falling backwards and hitting his head, he said there would have to be significant damage done to the arm in order for that to occur because of the speed of the vehicle and the amount of force that would be getting placed onto the bone. He said the injuries to John's arm also didn't match being hit by a taillight that then shattered, because he said if it had, his injuries would have been worse, and John's injuries appear to all be the same, and it just would not have been the case. He said that all of John's injuries, they look like they're all created with like about the same amount of pressure. And if it had been shattered and cut him, it just wouldn't all look the same. Some cuts would be deeper than others. And that is just not the case with John's arm. Mr. Lally had asked him, like, could these injuries have resulted if he was sideswiped? And he said, no, these injuries could not happen, because if the vehicle only hit the arm's on a joint, and thus the arm would move. It would take the impact. So in order for the body to be able to be moved and spun off, if John would have been hit on the arm by that size of vehicle at that speed, he would have fractures or broken bones on his arm, and he just doesn't have that. He said there just wasn't enough energy to transfer the body to that location. Lally continued to ask him questions and basically was saying, like, okay, well, if he wasn't hit by the vehicle, there was presence of his DNA there. There was shattered glass there.
And so also within your report, same paragraph, you indicate blood and DNA transfer would also be highly probable under such circumstances, none of which were reportedly found on the tail lamp assembly or any of the fractured pieces, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that DNA consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe was actually found on the tail light housing from the defendant's vehicle?
I'm aware after we wrote or issued the report that it became known to us that I believe DNA was tested and some DNA was found, I believe a small amount. I don't believe any blood evidence was located or found on any pieces, but there was indication of DNA on the taillight housing.
There was also DNA matching Mr. O'Keefe that was found on the exterior of the piece of drinking glass that was found right near his body.
I believe so, yes, sir.
And there was also pieces approximately 1/16 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch of clear and red plastic that was subsequently found to be consistent with the defendant's taillight that was found embedded within Mr. O'Keefe's shirt.
Within the shirt, I believe, yes, sir. Not his actual body.
And so this is all things that you found out after you issued your report in February of 2024, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Now, when you were talking about the injuries to the back of the head of Mr. O'Keefe, consistent with coming in contact with a hard surface, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would that hard surface include if the ground was frozen?
Well, you'd have to perform an analysis, actually, because you'd have to determine how hard that ground was. You'd have to look at the freeze and thaw cycle, probably leading up to weeks of that. You can't just look at ground and say, well, it's below freezing, so that ground must be frozen. I mean, is it a possibility? It may be, but you have to go through an actual analysis and procedure to determine how hard that ground is and whether it could have produced those injuries.
So it is something that's capable of being done by you, is that correct?
Performing that type of an analysis?
Yes.
You could go through and do it, sure, yeah.
But you didn't do it, correct?
No, I did not do it, no. Because, yeah, there's no need in this case. We don't know what happened in this case. There's no indication of, certainly, it's not consistent with getting hit by the car and ending up where he did, even if the ground is somehow hard enough to cause that type of an injury. Again, there's no movement and no force to get his body over there, and then the damage with the car is inconsistent with him being struck by it. So whether the ground could cause it or not, the roadway could cause it, the curb could cause it, a bat could cause it. There's numerous different possibilities, and we don't really have enough evidence in this case to determine what one specific event actually caused that injury.
You didn't have enough evidence based on what you were provided. Isn't that fair to say?
I didn't have enough evidence based on what I was provided, and even looking at the additional evidence that I became aware of after the fact, there's still no evidence. I mean, you can't deny the science and the physics as to what would have happened if he was struck by the vehicle. So anything past that, you have to somehow overcome that hurdle, which is very difficult to do.
Dr. Rentschler went on further to explain that if a person is sideswiped, that by its nature, it would not cause much damage. You might say, well, maybe that's why there's just not much damage to John's arm. Could be. But then how did he end up where he was? By its nature, a sideswipe does not transfer much energy or velocity to the individual. So when something gets hit, whatever this is traveling, that amount of energy is going to be transferred into this object, and that's going to move that much. So if they're saying it's a sideswipe, that energy is not going to be transferred because it's literally swiping. And similar to this, if John was hit or sideswiped, there just would not have been enough energy to transfer him 20, 30 feet. And with all of that, defense rests their case. Day 31 will have closing arguments. Please like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll be notified when I upload my next video. I may be a slow learner, but I figured out why Lowley objects repeatedly until they're finally pulled into sidebar. So once I figured out why Lowley objects so much, I was able to become less annoyed by all his objections, and I was actually able to then start predicting when he was going to object. So I thought that was cool, but maybe I'm a slow learner. Just barely figured this out. Have a good night. Bye.